December 7th, 1942. The wind howls across the steppe outside Stalingrad, sweeping powdered snow through shattered ruins and over the trenches of the German Sixth Army. It is a pre-dawn hour when frost dims every color into shades of iron. Feldwebel, Otto Grunewald, breathes into cupped hands, watching his breath crystallize in the air. Behind him, the city's broken skyline looms like the ribs of a dead leviathan. The ground trembles not with artillery, but with the rhythmic thunder of marching feet. At first, he thinks it's the same exhausted Soviet units they fought yesterday, and the day before, and the week before that. But as the horizon brightens, he sees shapes moving in the half-light, fresh silhouettes, steady, uniform, unhurried. New faces. New rifles. New winter coats not yet caked with mud or smoke. Impossible, he mutters. A young lieutenant beside him squints through binoculars. They withdrew their wounded and dead last night, and replaced them. All of them. Otto has been on the Eastern Front long enough to know the Red Army throws men forward without hesitation, but he has never seen this entire formations melting away into the darkness, replaced before dawn, as if conjured from the snow itself. In the command dugout, maps are pinned to boards with knives, corners weighted by ammo boxes. Oberst Heinrich Haller, his face gaunt from sickness and hunger, bends over the lines with a grimace. 24 hours ago, he says, that sector was held by the 45th Guards Rifle Division. Now it's the 62nd Rifle Division. Fresh. Full strength. Major Gessler looks incredulous. That's impossible. Their losses yesterday were catastrophic. Haller lifts a trembling hand and points to the west-facing trenches. And yet the Soviets stand there rested, reinforced, ready to attack again. A shell explodes somewhere on the flank, rattling the boards and sending dust cascading from the ceiling. They barely react now. The constant shelling has become a grim metronome they endure more than fear. Intelligence said they were depleted. Gessler presses. That they were scraping the bottom of the barrel. Haller's eyes harden. Intelligence was wrong. The atmosphere inside the dugout feels heavier than the ice-laden air outside. The truth begins to sink, and the Soviets are not weakening. They are not thinning. They are not exhausted. They are growing stronger. Outside, Otto hears a commissar's bullhorn echoing across the fields. The message is muffled by wind, but its cadence is unmistakable orders shouted with confidence, not desperation. Then the whistles come. A long, rising note cuts through the cold air. Thousands of Soviet soldiers surge forward, not sluggishly, not hesitantly, but with terrifying coordination. The sound of their advance is a living thing, a roar of boots and voices that swallows the landscape. Machine guns tremble on their mounts as German gunners brace for the impact. Otto fires. His comrades fire. The ground erupts in fountains of dirt and blood. But for every man who falls, another steps into place. Their lines don't buckle, they don't scatter. They push forward with relentless momentum, as if the steppe itself is driving them onward. The lieutenant curses under his breath. How do they still have more men? Behind the German lines, Haller grips the map's edge until his knuckles whiten. They're not rotating companies, he whispers. Not battalions, entire divisions. The realization settles over him like a burial shroud. The Soviets can replace a whole division overnight. And Germany cannot. Outside, the Red Army closes the distance. Their bayonets catch the pale sunrise, glinting like ice shards. Otto reloads. He is no longer thinking of victory, only survival. The wind shrieked as Otto reloaded, and the Soviet tide surged ever closer, a living wall of determination and frostbitten resolve. The first ranks hit the German trenches like a hammer, bayonets flashing, rifles cracking, men screaming. For a moment, noise drowned thought, pure chaos, pure survival. By afternoon, the battlefield fell eerily quiet. Smoke drifted across the blood-darkened snow like phantoms. The bodies, German and Soviet alike, lay stiff in frozen contortions. But even before the Germans could gather their wounded, new Soviet units advanced behind the fallen ones, marching with fresh coats and clean helmets. Fresh helmets. Otto noticed it first. Look at them, he murmured from behind a shattered wall. Their uniforms aren't even torn. Lieutenant Werner snapped his binoculars shut, face pale. They're not the same men. They rotated again. Already? Werner nodded. Already. Inside the temporary command post, a half-collapsed factory, Oberst Haller faced his officers with a weariness that sank deeper than the cold. Oil lamps cast grim shadows on the frost-covered walls. Every breath hung in the air, shimmering like ghosts. A courier burst inside, frost clinging to his eyelashes. From Army Group, Don, sir. Haller scanned the message, and his lips tightened. Another Soviet division identified on our northern flank. The 21st Rifle Division. Gessler frowned. But we just fought the 62nd this morning. And the 45th yesterday, another officer added. One of the artillery commanders, his voice hoarse, whispered, "Where are they finding all these men?" Haller folded the message carefully. Everywhere. Outside, motors rumbled, a convoy of horses, trucks, and exhausted soldiers trudging through the streets of crushed brick and frozen corpses. They shuffled past abandoned tanks half buried in snowdrifts, past the charred remains of factories whose chimneys now exhaled only wind. Winter deepened. Supplies dwindled. Ammunition ran low. The Luftwaffe struggled to fly in the blizzards. Radios crackled with broken pleas from units that were fading into the blizzard like dying torches. Otto crouched beside a barrel fire, rubbing his hands for warmth that couldn't reach his bones. He listened to the distant rumble of artillery. Soviet guns never rested now, pounding night and day with the energy of an empire that refused to collapse. He leaned toward Werner. "You think they'll break?" Werner stared at the dark horizon, where faint lights flickered signals, movements, the silhouettes of new troops arriving hourly. "No," he said. "They're not breaking, they're replacing." A distant explosion sent a tremor through the ground. Snow shook from ruined rooftops. The Soviet supply lines were alive, pulsing with reinforcements, while the German lines felt like a dying heartbeat. On the far side of the city, another German regiment already depleted was ordered to shift position. As they marched, they saw Soviet columns threading through the ruins, not in disorganized mobs but in structured formations. Fresh truckloads of ammunition, crates of rifles, machine guns, mortars, all moving with alarming speed. The realization began to spread like infection. This wasn't the same Red Army they met in June 1941. This was an army that learned, adapted, improved, and multiplied. Near dusk, Haller stood atop a pile of rubble overlooking the Volga. Ice floes drifted like slow-moving tombstones. Across the river, Soviet boats ferried more soldiers toward the city, thousands at a time. Fresh units. New faces. Reinforcements drawn from what seemed like endless reserves. He watched them unload and form ranks, in disciplined lines that vanished into the streets below. "I had thought," he murmured to himself, "that they were on the brink of collapse." The wind whipped his coat, carrying the sounds of distant singing Russian soldiers marching, chanting in unison. "But they are not collapsing," he whispered. "They are rising." And far behind the front, deep in Soviet territory, entire armies were gathering, waiting for their turn to replace the ones now surging into Stalingrad like waves breaking against a doomed shore. The darkness over Stalingrad was never silent. Too many guns, too many engines, too many ghosts. But tonight, something different unsettled the German defenders. A rhythm. Movement. Precision. The Soviets weren't merely attacking, they were coordinating on a scale no one in the 6th Army had imagined possible. Otto trudged through a bomb-blasted street, stepping past frozen bodies half buried in snow. He heard the distant rumble of approaching artillery. Is it the same battery as yesterday? Or is it another fresh one? He couldn't tell anymore. Inside the ruins of a collapsed apartment block, a platoon of Germans huddled near lanterns. They were gaunt, hollow-eyed men wrapped in threadbare coats, fingers numb despite the heat of burning debris. One of them was Corporal Rademacher, who still clung to the belief that the Soviets were close to breaking. But even he felt his confidence slipping. "They can't have endless divisions," he muttered to no one in particular. "Not even Russia." Werner shook his head. "It's not just divisions, look at their battalions' full strength. Reinforced, every morning we face new faces." The lamp flickered, and outside the wind screamed along ruined alleys like a banshee. Somewhere deeper in the city, a Soviet loudspeaker blared orders in sharp Russian, echoes bouncing between shattered walls. Werner leaned closer to the window just as a fresh Soviet formation passed across the street, disciplined, silent, rifles slung with practiced ease. They marched as if they had just arrived from a warm barracks rather than the hell of the Eastern Front. Rademacher stared, eyes wide. "They look rested," he whispered. "How is that possible?" "They rotated the entire front line," Otto said quietly. Again. At headquarters, the atmosphere was colder than the winter storm raging outside. A handful of officers gathered around a single stove hauler, Gessler, Lieutenant Colonel Kraus, and a few others whose rank meant little now that hunger and exhaustion had worn them all down to the same haunted state. Kraus held a notepad filled with reports. We've identified 4 new Soviet rifle divisions today. 4. Gessler rubbed his temples. Then where are the ones we fought 2 days ago? Withdrawn, Kraus replied. Replaced. Reorganized. And then what? Gessler snapped. Where do they vanish to? Haller exhaled sharply. To rear positions rest, regroup, replenish. And then they'll return. Kraus nodded grimly. Our best estimates say they can sustain this rotation for months. Silence fell. The men understood what that meant. The Sixth Army could not. Outside, the ground trembled. Not from artillery this time, but from the roar of engines. Soviet tanks T-34 seconds, their armor glistening with frost, growled through the ruins like mechanical beasts awakening after hibernation. Their tracks churned the snow into black slush as infantry moved alongside them in tight formation. Otto watched the spectacle from behind a collapsed tramcar. Every tank that passed drove home the same truth. These machines were not worn, not damaged, not limping. They were pristine. Repainted, repaired. Ready. More fresh Soviet troops spilled into trenches, cellars, and firing positions, methodical, efficient, tireless. Otto whispered a thought he had been afraid to voice until now. Where are they all coming from? Werner replied softly, everywhere. From the Volga, from the Urals, from Siberia. From places we've never even heard of. Otto watched a young Soviet soldier, the boy couldn't have been older than 19, jog off a boat and fall in line as if he had been fighting the whole war. Behind him came dozens more. Hundreds. Thousands. Haller stood at the command post window, the icy glass trembling from distant detonations. He looked over the city that he was supposed to hold, the city now cradled in the giant hands of Soviet industrial and human might. He understood something that German intelligence had failed to grasp. The Red Army was not disorganized. It was not crumbling. It was not exhausted. It was regenerating. Continually. Endlessly. Like a tide that would never recede. And somewhere deep in the ruined city, a distant horn sounded, calling yet another fresh Soviet unit into position for the next wave. January 10, 1943. Dawn crept over the horizon, pale and sickly. The temperature plunged to -30, and the cold alone was capable of killing a man. Frost formed on rifle bolts, breath froze on eyelashes. The air burned lungs like fire. And yet the Soviets moved. They marched, ran, shouted, and fought as if impervious to the cold that numbed German fingers and feet. As if the winter itself was on their side. Oberst Haller studied his map beneath the flickering light of an oil lamp. Red arrows surrounded his position on 3 sides: north, west, south, and the 4th side, the east, ended at the Volga River. The encirclement was complete. The noose was tightening. Supplies were nearly gone. A young radio operator approached. Herr Oberst. Another transmission. Haller already knew it would be bad news. It always was. Read it. The operator cleared his throat. The Soviets have brought in another Guards division. Fully equipped. Fresh troops, sir. Gessler, sitting on a wooden crate, laughed bitterly. Of course they have. But the absurdity was deadly real. I've never seen anything like this, the operator continued. It's as if they have an entire Second Army waiting behind the First. Haller stared at the boy. Not a second. An entire nation. Outside, Otto and Werner crouched behind a wrecked T-34, its steel frame twisted and blackened by earlier fighting. Snowflakes drifted across its burned hull like ashes falling on a corpse. From their vantage point, they watched a Soviet engineer unit sweep through the ruins, measuring distances, clearing debris, establishing firing lanes. Methodical, unhurried. Look at them. Werner murmured. They move like they're preparing for a parade. Otto adjusted his scarf, stiff with frozen sweat. Or preparing to bury us. From the north, a roar of artillery shattered the stillness. Soviet guns opened fire in a synchronized barrage, hundreds of them blanketing the German positions with thunder that shook the earth itself. Shells screamed overhead, traced into the sky like flaming comets before detonating in geysers of fire and ice. The ground convulsed under each strike. German soldiers dived for cover. But the Soviets didn't pause. Behind the raining shells came tanks. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Their hulls gleamed in the pale morning light, engines roaring with aggressive purpose. Infantry followed, disciplined and swift. Otto steadied his rifle. "We can't survive this." Werner didn't answer. His silence spoke everything. In the command post, dust poured from ceiling beams as artillery hammered the city. Reports came in positions overrun, battalions collapsing, ammunition expended. Haller stood rigid, listening as his officers shouted over each other, desperate for solutions that didn't exist. "Where do they keep finding men?" Gessler cried. "Where?" Kraus answered with the quiet certainty of a man who had seen the truth written in blood. "They started mobilizing millions the moment we crossed the border. Factories moved east. Reserves trained in Siberia. Civilians conscripted. They prepared for this the moment we invaded." Outside, the horizon glowed with the fire of 1,000 guns. Haller closed his eyes. And now the bill comes due. The Soviets surged forward again, fresh rifles, fresh uniforms, fresh resolve. Their trenches never seemed to empty, every casualty was replaced before the body grew cold. Their rotations continued through night and day, as natural and unstoppable as the turn of the earth. Otto fired until his rifle jammed from the cold. He grabbed Werner's machine gun and braced it against rubble. Soviet infantry advanced in waves, stepping over the fallen without hesitation. "We can't hold," someone screamed. But the enemy didn't relent. They moved with coordination and confidence, every squad reinforced, every platoon full strength, every division seemingly endless. Werner shouted above the roar of battle. "They're replacing divisions like we replace cartridges." The sky burned orange as tracer fire streaked past. A T-34 smashed through a wall, scattering bricks like dice across the snow. Otto ducked. "This isn't a battle anymore." Werner finished the thought. "It's an avalanche." And in that moment, as the city shook under the weight of Soviet might, the German realization crystallized like ice in their veins. They were fighting an enemy who could never be exhausted. January 26, 1943. Night. The cold was a predator now, stalking through the ruins with relentless intent. Temperatures fell to levels that froze exposed skin in minutes, turned boots into blocks of ice, and stole the breath from any man foolish enough to remove his scarf. The dead accumulated everywhere, stacked in alleys, frozen in trenches, buried beneath collapsed buildings. Death had become as common a sight as the snow itself. Otto and Werner sat huddled beside a broken wall, a single lantern flickering between them. Its light barely penetrated the darkness, but its warmth small as it was kept their fingers from freezing stiff. Otto rested his rifle across his knees. Though the weapon was nearly useless, he had only 6 cartridges left. "We can't hold much longer," Werner murmured, voice hoarse. "We haven't been holding for days," Otto replied. "We've been surviving." Distant footsteps echoed through the ruined, Soviet soldiers moving into new positions. Always new positions. Always more of them. Always replaced before exhaustion could slow them. Werner leaned back against the shattered brick. "You notice it, too, right? Every time we kill one squad, another fresh takes its place." Otto nodded. "I think they have more divisions behind the river. Maybe hundreds more." Werner gave a humorless laugh. "Hundreds. It feels like thousands." A sudden blast shook the earth, sending powdery snow cascading into their laps. Soviet artillery opened fire again, precisely coordinated, striking deeper into what remained of the German perimeter. The barrage worked like scissors, cutting away the final threads of resistance. Inside the command bunker, Haller stood stiffly in front of a cracked mirror, wiping frost from his coat. The bunker stank of sweat, smoke, and damp clothes. His officers, those who remained, huddled around the radio set its feeble signal, their only connection to the outside world. A transmission crackled through the static. "Soviet forces entering Central District. They've split the pocket." "Repeat, they've split the pocket." Gessler slammed his fist on the table. "That's it, we're finished." "No." Haller straightened. "We were finished weeks ago." He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it with acceptance. With clarity. The same clarity he saw reflected in the eyes of his men who finally understood what they faced. The Red Army wasn't merely large. It was inexhaustible. A force sustained by a continent-sized homeland, by factories hidden beyond the reach of German bombers, by reserves drawn from steppes in villages far from the front. The Soviets rotated divisions with a speed that defied German expectations, replacing entire formations as naturally as a living body replaces blood. And now, with the encirclement complete, they tightened the ring. Hour by hour. Meter by meter. At dawn, the final push began. Artillery shook the earth, firing in perfect rhythm. T-34 seconds advanced, tracks grinding ice into black slush. Fresh Soviet divisions rested, fed, replenished, marched behind the tanks, rifles carried with an energy that seemed almost mocking. Otto and Werner watched from the facade of a ruined schoolhouse. The Soviets came in columns, column after column, moving with relentless precision. Their bayonets glinted like shards of sunlight. Werner tightened his grip on his weapon. "We can't stop them." "No," Otto said. "But we can face them." The Soviets closed in. Street by street, room by room, they pushed forward, flushing out the last pockets of resistance. German soldiers fought valiantly, but the Red Army's numbers and the freshness of their forces overwhelmed any stand the defenders could muster. In the command bunker, the final radio transmission crackled through the static. "Stalingrad. Lost." The words lingered, heavy as stone. Haller listened, eyes hollow. He removed his gloves, revealing hands raw and cracked from the cold. He set them on the table and looked around the room at the officers who had followed him to the end, at the maps now irrelevant, at the walls trembling from Soviet shellfire. "So this is how it ends," he whispered. "Not with a rout, but with replacement, with rotation, with an enemy who can endure more than we ever imagined." Outside, Soviet voices echoed through the ruins. The horns sounded again, clear, triumphant. Otto and Werner surrendered together, stepping out into the dawn with hands raised. Soviet soldiers surrounded them, young, fresh-faced, determined. They looked nothing like the men Otto had fought in the summer of 1941. These were the heirs of a war machine that had learned to survive, adapt, and multiply. The machine that had crushed them. The machine that could replace entire divisions overnight. The collapse of the German Sixth Army was not sudden, it was slow, inevitable. The final consequence of facing an enemy whose reserves were measured not in battalions or even divisions but in millions. The Red Army advanced, and Germany's hopes froze in the ruins of Stalingrad.